Good morning on this Sunday, May 14th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. In a town hall, former President Donald Trump doubles down on his controversial phone call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger about the 2020 election. Also, Democrats urge Governor Brian Kemp to call a special session on gun control, and state tax collections are down for the second month in a row. Melita and Phil are here. Thomas Searcy is here filling in for Theron, and Brian Robinson's here filling in for Martha. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
In a fiery town hall in New Hampshire, former President Donald Trump defended the controversial phone call he made to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger about the 2020 election, demanding he find enough votes to reverse his election loss in Georgia. Brian, we'll start with you first. You and Phil both watched this town hall meeting. President Trump said it was a perfect phone call, and he doubled down, saying that the election was rigged.
The phone call was delusional. What he was saying on the phone call was delusional. Where I agree with him is it wasn't illegal. He clarified what I have been saying on the Georgia Gang. He was not asking for fraud to be committed. In his mind, there was all of this illegal voting going on in Georgia. Now, I disagree with him on that. I don't think there was. But I do believe he thinks that there was. And he was saying, of all of the votes that I was robbed of, I just need 11,780. Now, again, I don't think the President of the United States should have been on that phone call. It was inappropriate and certainly had a bad look to it, but it was not illegal. And I don't know why we are spending so much taxpayer resources here in Georgia investigating this. I thought what he said there, other than the fact that it was perfect, made some legal sense.
Well, DA Fani Willis might disagree, and some of the other investigators on this. Alicia.
You know, this is a guy, and I know he's a former president, I struggle with saying that sometimes, who never ceases to amaze me. When he was president, he would do one thing and you would say, okay, this is it. Everybody's gonna go crazy. And then he just keeps doing it. So now here's a former president of the United States who's on national television incriminating himself. So I'm ready for this whole thing to be over. I appreciate what our governor has said. Let's get over the sour grapes and move on to the future. I'm ready. It's time for this guy to just go away for a long time, whether that's jail or wherever he goes.
Phil.
You know, former President Trump has every right to question a Secretary of State who oversees elections. And he started the phone conversation by first addressing his attorney, Cleta Mitchell. He says, Cleta, we need to find 11,000 votes. And like Brian said, he was told all this stuff, rightly or wrongly, that there was cheating, etc. And so it didn't incriminate himself. Nothing was new from that. But just to get to the GOP town hall, I think that he's one of the best counterpunchers politically in modern political history. He wiped the floor with the liberal CNN so-called journalist. And he did touch kitchen table issues. He talked about inflation. He talked about the disaster of the Afghanistan withdrawal. He talked about open borders. He talked about education. I mean, he pivoted to all of those issues and for Ukraine. A general election.
And Ukraine.
Melita, I was surprised because usually in these town halls you kind of have a mix of different political opinions, but this audience really favored the former president and kind of egged him on.
Well, and it was an audience he was allowed to select. And so I think this was kind of an unmitigated disaster for CNN. And it was also full display of the absolute disrespect the twice impeached former president has for women, not only in the remarks he made about E. Jean Carroll, who had brought the lawsuit and won, but also the misogyny he demonstrated to the newswoman trying to ask him the questions. He just showed precisely who he was, and I join Alicia in being ready for him to disappear into the sunset in some fashion.
Phil, let me ask you this, because as a journalist and as a former journalist myself, some of the questions, it's the way that they question him that bothers me. It's okay to lay out the facts, right? And let the viewers decide if he's a liar or not. But for these journalists to come out and call the former president a liar over and over again, I just journalistically have issues with that.
Well, I agree. That's the way you were trained, and that's the way I was trained when I graduated from journalism school. You can ask tough questions and you can ask probing questions. But you're right, when you use pejoratives, when you start name calling and editorializing, it used to be we at least tried to keep opinion and commentary separate from regular news. You were a reporter for a long time, and you followed that wall there. So I think this is why journalists are in worse disrepute than used car salesmen.
Melita and then Brian.
But never have we had a political figure who has such a history of telling so many lies.
That doesn't excuse it.
But you can lay out the facts, but it's not up to the journalist to say he's a liar. That was my whole thing. It's like, lay out both sides. It's what I've done all my life.
I think what they were trying to do was fact check, and perhaps they didn't do it in quite the way you would have expected. But we've never had such a serial liar in such a high political position.
Bill Clinton. Wait a minute.
Yes. Look, CNN knew that their base, which is largely Democratic, wanted Trump to be attacked all the time. And so they knew they were going to get lit up if they didn't interrupt him every few seconds. Here's the problem from the Republican perspective. This was supposed to be a GOP town hall. And she was asking questions that Democrats would want to ask about. Republicans aren't going to ask him about E. Jean Carroll. They're not going to ask him about the Fulton County case. They're going to ask him about the border and inflation and Ukraine. And those got touched upon. What she was focused on is what Democrats are talking about, not what Republicans were talking about. And I think that was a failing.
All right, since you brought up Fulton County, let's talk about Fulton County, because the prosecutor investigating possible illegal meddling in the 2020 election has agreed to immunity deals with at least 8 Republican fake electors who signed a certificate falsely stating that then President Donald Trump had won the state. Defense attorney Kimberly DeBrow revealed the existence of the immunity deals in a court filing, saying her 8 clients had accepted the agreements last month. Now, the filing does not identify the people who were offered immunity deals, but Alicia, what does this say about the cases against the others?
Again, this is a part of this Republican circus that's going on now, and I'm ready for it to be over. What I appreciate is that there are some immunity deals, which means that we'll probably get to more of the truth, and hopefully the prosecutors will be able to get the information, the facts that they need to finally put this case to bed. It looks to me, I think everybody can agree that this former president will probably be indicted, and I will tell you that my biggest question is, what was the intent here? Did these people know that they were breaking the law, or was this a political stunt? So I'm interested to get more of the facts and really get an understanding of what happened here, what was their intent, and what's going to happen to those who didn't get this deal.
Phil, should these other electors be concerned with these immunity deals, the ones who did not take a deal?
No, let me give you some background. I call it, it's a stumble by DA Fani Willis and that special prosecutor she brought in, Nathan Ward. I call it the no immunity deal. Why do I say that? Because a year ago, Willis blanketly said, oh, we'll give you immunity. Didn't specify anybody of the 8 or the 10 electors. There's now 8. And so last week, then they started to name, okay, here's, you get immunity, you're elector A, you're B, you're C. Well, Nathan Ward then all of a sudden tried to trick them, and this is on recording, and tried to get them to lie. And so bottom line is, this is very unethical in my opinion. This is going to hurt the case. They had to stop doing it because of the recording. It's going to Judge McBurney on how they tried to get them to lie. Did you get immunity a year ago? Well, no. Yes, you did. That was the trick. And so I don't think this is going to help Fani Willis's case at all. It's already been hurt by the special grand jury and the nonsense that went on there.
Melita?
I believe some of those who did not receive immunity are tied more deeply to the overall case, including the breach of data down in Coffee County, which happened the day after the insurrection. So I think those fake electors who did not receive immunity have a lot to be worried about as a part of the overall plan that constitutes the entire case.
Should I be worried? I was called for Fulton County jury duty July 14th, June 14th, June 14th. So here we go.
Can I mention just one quick thing? Let me mention just one quick thing. If they're all given immunity, they all are saying the same thing according to their lawyer. We didn't do anything wrong. So the frustration of Fani Willis is she can't flip them.
All right, the AJC is reporting that the Georgia Court of Appeals revived a lawsuit by election critics who want to search for fraudulent ballots from the 2020 election. The court sent the case back to a judge to decide whether to allow an outside review of Fulton County's 150,000 original absentee ballots. Now, there's no guarantee that that inspection will take place, but Brian, this is an interesting development. Or is it?
Well, it is, because we thought this was over
Right.
some time ago. And look, this is not necessarily good for Republicans because, to Alicia's point, and to Brian Kemp's point, and to the viewpoint of many Georgia Republicans, it's time to move on from 2020. This is not politically helpful, but this is how the judicial process works. The Superior Court judge said that these plaintiffs didn't have standing. The appeals court, sometime later, said that they do. And so this is just a part of the process. I don't think that this is going to eat up a lot of oxygen in the state as far as, and look, if they don't find anything, then that should, I've said this before, put the nail in the coffin on this talk. But if they do find something, heavens to Betsy.
Haven't heard heavens to Betsy
I
in a
know.
long time.
I'm bringing it back.
All right. Up next, Democrats calling Governor Kemp to announce a special session on gun control.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Several Georgia Democrats gathered at the state capitol this week, calling on Governor Brian Kemp to call a special session on gun control after a gunman opened fire at a medical facility in Midtown Atlanta. Melita, we still don't know how the suspect got the gun, but was this more of a political stunt by Democrats? Because we know Governor Kemp is not going to call a special session. Wouldn't it have been better to just call a meeting with the governor and discuss possible options?
Well, I think the Democrats knew that the governor is the person who pushed for the guns everywhere legislation. The Democrats have called for gun safety measures for years and not received any traction across the aisle. The Governor Kemp called their press conference posturing, but I would send he and his speechwriters back to the dictionary, because posturing is behavior intended to impress or mislead. And that's not what these Democrats were doing. They were issuing a call to action. And I go back to Senator Warnock's speech when he talked about faith without works is dead, kind of, on this issue of Republicans send their thoughts and prayers, but then they do nothing to solve the problem.
Phil, we really talked about this a lot last week. I don't want to rehash everything, but there was common ground that we saw among the panel on mental health issues.
Well, that's right. I wish the Democrat, and there's a lot of Democrats that want to focus on mental health, and with Republicans, I think it was the wrong issue. It was political posturing, to your point, by the Democrats, and it wasn't guns everywhere. It's called constitutional carry, and there's exceptions to it. But I mean, even the Democrats are saying, and like Andre Dickens, the mayor of Atlanta, said, we don't want to step on the Second Amendment. Well, don't step on the Second Amendment.
Oh.
So let's not have confiscation.
Alicia.
So this is deeply personal to me, right? I've got kids in school. For me, I think about the day after Uvalde, when my husband and I struggled about sending our daughter to school, and we let her go. She comes home, and we're talking, how's it going? What are kids saying? And she said, they're talking about it, but nobody's going to do anything. And so I don't want my now 16-year-old to be right. So while Democrats are doing something, right, trying to have a special session, they probably should sit down and meet with the governor. I'm concerned that our state leadership is not doing enough. And so I'm thankful that Democrats have done this, but we have to do something. We've got to, whether it's a special session, whether it's whatever it is, we've got to do something, because people are dying. And all the political posturing and talking about elections from 2.5 years ago, that's not what we're concerned about in this state.
Brian.
I think this whole calling for doing something, which is a common Democratic refrain, ignores the fact that what they would do wouldn't solve the problem. These laws that the Democrats are talking about, they're on the books in blue states. Places like Chicago and New York City and California. Are we seeing a reduction in gun violence there?
Because they keep getting guns from Georgia.
Is it better off there? Well, that's just it. Like a background check is check isn't going to change that, right? To really solve it, as Phil said, you would have to go and confiscate weapons. There are 300 million in America. It is impossible. It would cause a rebellion if that actually happened. We have had, over the last 30 years, a reduction in violent crime, despite what we've had since COVID. And over that time, guns ownership has doubled. So we have seen gun ownership parallel to violent crime going down.
Except we don't have red flag laws and a lot of other things that could prevent these murders from happening.
Which gives the government the ability to take away someone's gun. And that can be politicized at some juncture. That's the fear.
Melita, last word on this.
To what Brian was saying, if you look at the gun deaths per capita, state by state, it is the red states controlled by Republicans which have the highest per capita gun rate deaths. And so the blue laws that maybe call for safe storage or call for a limit on the age when you can purchase a gun or require licensure for concealed carry, which we no longer require, those are the things that have made that death rate lower.
All right, I want to move on because UGA football coach Kirby Smart says his decision to decline the team's invitation to the White House for its back-to-back national championship wins has nothing to do with politics, but rather scheduling. Smart is hosting hundreds of youth football players, my son being one of them, for a football camp, and says when he was at Alabama, he went to the White House 3 times because they received invites right after their wins and not some 5 months later. Brian, this is kind of in your wheelhouse.
I have been pushing so hard for them to get into the White House. Huge missed opportunity for Biden to not act on this immediately. Georgia's one of 3 swing states. Biden's got to win here. Why would you not immediately get the most popular people in this state to come to your house for pictures and maybe some snacks? You know, that'd be fantastic for him. Why would you not do that? Here's the thing with Kirby. This has nothing to do with Biden being a Democrat or his political views. When Kirby went, Obama was president. He went 3 times with Obama. Kirby Smart is intense. And when spring practice starts, there is no more celebrating the past. There is no more championship celebrations. And so that's what you're seeing is an intense coach focused on winning another one. And we'll go perhaps President Biden next year when we win our 3rd.
Melita.
Well, I think the tragic accident which happened right after the celebration of the national championship perhaps delayed any invitation because it would probably have been inappropriate for the entire football team to immediately drive up or fly up to Washington for a big celebration immediately after the funeral for one of their own.
Phil?
Biden probably forgot that Georgia won the national championship, and someone had to tell him recently, so
Wow.
I'm with Brian.
Alicia, final word on this and we'll move on.
I don't know if it was timing or politics. I don't like that Republicans came out celebrating the declination, but I will say I hate that these young people miss out on an opportunity to meet the President of the United States.
I agree, and go to the White House. It could be once in a lifetime for them.
I totally agree.
All right. Up next, state revenues take a deep dive. We'll discuss what that could mean for the Georgia budget next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Phil says this next issue is boring, but it's very important. So state tax collections were down in April compared to the same time last year, a decrease of almost 17%. Alicia, Governor Kemp's administration predicted this, but could this mean the end of tax rebates for Georgians?
It probably is the end of tax rebates, and that would be good financial policy. What I appreciate as someone who served in the legislature and on the Appropriations Committee are those staffers, those economists, the folks in the Office of Planning and Budget who made these predictions already, and as such, the governor and the legislature have planned for this. Here's what I want people to know. I want folks in education, school boards, CFOs, and school systems to think about what this means, because this is a signal for a declining revenue over time. And so while they've celebrated having these surpluses, more than the entire state of Georgia collectively, now is the time to start thinking about what do we need to do to prepare for what could be a burst, if you will, in this economy. And what does that mean for students in our public education system? So that's my warning.
Very good point. Now, the Army's training hub in Georgia was renamed Fort Moore during a ceremony Thursday, replacing the name of a Confederate officer that had adorned the base for more than a century with that of a decorated Vietnam War commander and his wife. Now, the name change for the post, formerly known as Fort Benning, had been in the making for more than a year since an independent commission recommended renaming 9 of its bases commemorating Confederate officers. Melita, first to you.
Well, I think it's interesting that the general and his wife are both buried on the Army base, which will now bear their names. And I love that it's named for both of them because she took a leadership role in organizing families to support each other while the men were deployed during the Vietnam War. And then, of course, he wrote that book, We Are Soldiers Once and Young, which has become one of the most highly rated military reading list books. And so it's a fitting tribute for the two of them.
Phil.
I would agree that it is a fitting tribute for both of them. They do deserve it. You mentioned the history. I thought it was a total waste of money that we have to rename all of these bases. I don't think most people even knew who the heck these names were. But I had active duty at Fort Gordon, and I'll always call it Fort Gordon because I have wonderful memories there.
Well, Brian, Fort Gordon, I think, is next. So that's the next one that will get the name change.
Yes, of course, General Gordon has the statue on the Capitol grounds. You know, it's an interesting topic. The Congress made the decision to take away any Confederate names. But one thing people don't know is that when those names first took effect, the states were given the right to name the bases in their states. Now, I understand those are federal facilities, so legally, Congress has that right. I would have liked for Georgia to have had the ability to rename it itself. And maybe they would have picked the exact same people, I don't know. But I would have loved for that to have been a conversation we could have had here.
Interesting point. One last issue here, a major change in how English is taught in Georgia's public school classrooms. The new curriculum will have more of a focus on phonics, imagine that, after milestones testing showed only 36% of third graders were proficient in English. Alicia, I mean, it sounds like they had to do something.
Yes, it was about time. So let's talk about the fact that 22 other states have already done this. Fulton County, kudos to you, Fulton County School District, spent $90 million, more than half of their federal funds, on the science of reading. Why? Because it's research-based. Why? Because we know that if only 30% of our students are reading proficiently, we need to do something drastic. My concern, I'm grateful that the legislature had the leadership to step forward and do this. Frankly, the Department of Education should have been leading on this, but it's not funded. And so if you look at Mississippi, who has led this in the country, they have spent a lot of money on training teachers, making sure they have the support and resources that they need. We're not doing that. And so let's see what happens in 2025 when students are testing again with the new state standards in ELA and teachers haven't had the support that they need.
Phil.
So we need leadership in this area.
Well, I'm going to be agreeing with Alicia on a lot of her talking points. We're decades behind in getting back to phonics. That's how all of us learned English, and that's a shocking statistic, Lori, 36%. And so, yes, we need to be funding and we need to be focusing, and I'm with you. We're going to be watching what happens.
Well, they rewrote the math curriculum, and you know how I all felt about Common Core, but I mean, 36%, it's just,
It's unacceptable.
it's heartbreaking. It really is.
It is devastating.
All right, up next, we'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Well, first, just a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there watching, and of course to your beautiful wife, Karina, a mother as well, and a happy birthday to Karina.
That's right. It's her birthday on Friday, so we had a big celebration over the weekend. My winner is Kaylee Noggle, who's your friend and mine. She's the commissioner of the Department of Community Health. She's been hired to head the Georgia Hospital Association. She's a great hire, very well respected, very competent, and that's going to be a great move for them. My loser is Joe Biden for what we talked about before, not having the dogs in the White House, not acting faster. Huge political loss of opportunity there for him.
Alicia.
My winner this week is Marietta police officer Austin Martin, who is in his first year of being a police officer, who saved a woman this week who was getting ready to jump off of I-75.
Oh, wow.
And he spent hours talking, literally talking her off the ledge. And because of his bravery and heart, her life has been saved. And so, of course, we pray for her and her family and hope that she gets the help that she needs. My loser this week is going to have to be the leadership of Georgia until we do something to stop gun violence in this state. We have to save lives.
All right.
And happy Mother's Day.
Yes, to you as well.
Thank
Phil.
you.
All right, I got a couple losers. One of them is Rochelle Walensky. She is leaving as the director of the Centers for Disease Control here in Atlanta. Good riddance to her. She really ruined the reputation of the Centers for Disease Control, sadly, during the pandemic. All of these conflicting advisories on masks, they kept switching on vaccines, and the lockdowns, which were devastating to our children and education. So a couple other losers are Democratic Senators John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. They're not saying a thing about this humanitarian crisis and scandal on our southern border that the other loser, President Biden, is presiding over. Forget about the national security implications. This is outrageous to have an open border and to have children being thrown over the border with no parents, with no supervision. It's terrible.
Melita.
Well, happy Mother's Day to everyone, especially the ones who pretend that the burnt toast is the best they've ever had. And also, Shirley Franklin celebrated a birthday this past week, so happy birthday to her. On Monday, the state DNR lease for Pine Log Wildlife Management Area in Bartow and Forsyth County ends, and this is a loss for the hikers and bikers, sportsmen, hunters to have enjoyed access to 14,000 acres for more than 5 decades. Negotiations continue, and if the state can find a way to buy that property, it'll be a win-win for the region, because Stamp Creek gives our state some of its purest water and makes Lake Allatoona the prettiest lake in the state.
It's an issue that we'll have to revisit and debate too on that one. And I'm just going to make you a winner for saying heavens to Betsy on our air.
Coming back.
We are old school, right? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful Mother's Day, wonderful weekend. We'll see you back here next week.